Welcome to this Considered Opinions podcast.
I'm Dougal.
And I'm Celia. Thank you for joining us. A few weeks ago, we talked about the concept of hope and its importance for building a future that we want. If you haven't checked that one out yet, I encourage you to have a listen. But in today's podcast, we want to look at the trap of false hope, how we can recognize it and how to avoid it.
Yes, I've seen a couple of instances just in the last few weeks where, there's been spats and really it's sort of highlighted the problem of putting your hope in fallible humans. So I follow a lot of the UK politics, and there's been a very public spat between Rupert Lowe and Nigel Farage, and Elon Musk has got involved, and they can't both be right.
No, but I think that really highlights, particularly with the Reform UK issue, is that for a lot of people, Reform was a symbol of hope.
Yes.
Hope that things could get better.
Change.
Hope for change. Hope that their country could be saved, essentially. And finding out that their idols had feet of clay has been very hard for a lot of people in the last few weeks. And for me, it really highlighted how if we put our hope in a public figure or a political solution to solve all the problems that we've got in the world, we're going to inevitably end up disappointed.
Yes. What about if we're putting our hope, rather than in people, we're putting our hope in some future prediction or our own abilities to get our way through some difficult situation?
Well, I think that comes down to if we can predict it, we can control the attitude. That's kind of like, if we know what's coming, we can prepare for it, we can be in control of it, we can minimize its negative impacts on us. And that's another way. Well, we had a very personal experience with that with the cyclone. It was predicted, we knew it was coming, but there was a moment in the middle of the night, and I just realized, I could get the most powerful human-made contraption or people, and it was not going to stop the water from falling from the sky. Yep. And so that really does highlight how we can put false hope in our own strength and in man's ability to control everything.
Or come up with solutions. It reminds me a bit of a quote from Thomas Sowell. He's, famous for saying, there are no solutions, only trade-offs. That you can't necessarily, and it comes down to that, you can't control everything, or you can't have it all.
Well, I think that it comes down to nothing is perfect, and I think with political situations, that's what we get. We don't choose the perfect solution, we choose the least worst option.
Yes, and this is also where, focusing on first principles or an Aristotelian worldview or a sort of a Western Christian view, what you don't want to do is put your hopes in the changeable, in the finite. You want to put your hopes in things that are divine, that are infinite and eternal. And you really have to avoid putting your hope in things that are of this world.
Well, one of the things with false hope is that we will inevitably get disappointed.
Yes.
And that creates disappointment as like the antithesis of hope.
Yes, it sucks that energy away.
And as human beings, we need hope. And if we don't have hope, we end up in despair. Now, we were listening to somebody talking this morning, and he said, if you have despair, you're going to end up trying to put your hope in things like guns and bombs, and it leads you down quite a dark path.
Yes.
And so the importance of making sure that our hope is in trustworthy things means that we are less likely to end up in situations and feelings of despair.
Yes. And this is another example is Viktor Frankl's man's search for meaning. I mean, Viktor Frankl spent a time in concentration camps, and he tells a story of one of the inmates that they believed they had a dream that told them that they would be set free on a particular date. And that gave them hope in the short run. But as that date got closer and closer, and it became more obvious that the camps were not going to be liberated on that date, that person lost hope. And eventually they actually, ironically, died the day that they believed they were to be set free.
Sadly.
It's a sad story, but it's kind of also made the whole thing a bit of a self-fulfilling prophecy in a way.
Well, I think it highlights the power of hope or despair.
Yes.
And how the false hopes can lead to despair.
Yes.
There's another story about somebody who was told by the doctor that they had cancer.
Yes.
And it was inoperable, and their doctor said, you've got 3 months left to live. So this person went home and settled their affairs in order and everything, and then 3 months later they died. And when the autopsy was performed, they found that it was a misdiagnosis and there was no cancer.
Wow.
I think what it shows us is the power of how we think, and that false hopes can have such an influence on our lives for the negative if we're not careful. And that includes things like if we're waiting for a political solution or a public figure to solve all of the world's problems, we're not going to do anything because we think that somebody will come along and do something for us.
And on the converse, we may not be doing that, but we may be putting all of our hopes in our own strength, our own abilities. Maybe an example might be you're putting away things for a financial collapse, and then for whatever reason things don't pan out the way you thought they were going to pan out, and whatever it is that you saved is worthless when you thought it was going to be worth a lot.
So I think the importance with false hope is that everything in the world is fallible, and that there's always possibilities for being let down if we put all of our hopes and belief and faith in those worldly things.
Now, what you're not saying is don't do anything. You're not saying you just live for today and, that sort of nihilistic, fatalistic hedonism that you can potentially fall into.
I think that is the outworking of people who of a disappointed person, that they are disappointed and therefore they are going to an extreme. It is actually a form of despair. It's quite a dark path. I mean, one form of despair is to put all your hope in bombs or guns, or another hope
might be putting it in assets, or it might be putting it in provisions.
Well, I think that what I was going to say is the flip side of it is that you can also go, well, there's no point in doing anything, so let's just live for tomorrow we die.
Yes.
Kind of attitude.
Yeah.
And so let's just live for the now, and it ends up with the nihilism that you mentioned.
So we pointed out a lot of problems, but what's the positives? What's the advice? What can people do? We don't want to have false hopes, but we still want to have some hope. So
how to avoid the false part?
Yes.
Well, I think first of all, the first thing is to recognize the possibility that one can have false hope.
Yes.
That not all hopes are founded in truth.
And it could be something that on the face of it seems very good. You could have a false hope in say family, where you put all your aspirations and your meaning in your family, but you have the example of someone like Job in the book of Job, where he gets all of that taken away, gets his wealth taken away, gets his family taken away. then what? All of the things that we would, as a culture, think are meaningful have been taken away from him.
Well, it's not to say that those things aren't meaningful. They are very meaningful things, and they do. I do think that they make life better, and they are part of what makes life good.
Yes.
But I think that the important thing is whether it is your reason for existence.
Yes.
And there was a man during the Second World War who was also in the concentration camps, and he was in Warsaw when they were taking people, shipping them out, and his wife and 5 children were shot in the street, but he was kept alive because he could speak several languages, German and Polish and Hungarian and a few others. And so he had literally lost everything except for his life. And at the end of the war, when the camp was liberated, the American soldiers who met him were sure that he'd only been there a few weeks because he was a lot healthier than everybody else, and he was a lot more invigorated, had a lot more life in him. But what they discovered was it was about his hope. It wasn't about, he didn't have his reason for existence being these material things around him or what was going on in his life. He had hope in the eternal.
The key thing here is understanding eternity, understanding what is the divine. So the nature of looking or putting your faith in things that are eternal and divine, those are unchanging. They will, therefore they cannot let you down because they will still be around long after we're all dead.
And I think that's the advantages that a lot of the previous generations have had, is that in our modern culture we have said, oh, we are scientific people, we don't need anything but what is tangible here and now. And actually, as human beings, we are more than that.
Yes.
And so having this attitude and knowledge that we're more than just material beings is an important part of hope and distinguishing between false hopes and true hopes.
I'm reminded of Yuval Harari, who is a favourite of the Wefers, and he's basically on record as saying that he believes that humans have become greater than God, that we are our own gods. But that's a prime example of that we've absolutized the relative and relativized the absolute. So we've sort of decided that the divine is not as divine as we thought it was, but that we fallible human beings are somehow now divine.
I think another thing with not having false hope is the importance of keeping perspective. And in keeping perspective, we're not getting too much inside our own heads. And part of that is being in community and in relationship and with each other. No man is an island. We need each other. We need each other to keep perspective. And that's not looking to each other to save us or to provide us with the ultimate answer. It's just that there is more perspective when you're not completely inside your own head and not thinking, I'm going to be the one to fix it. It's the same way to stop us. It can also help us to not focus only on a public figure or a political solution.
Yes.
That community helping us to working together to build the future that we want. That is a practical steps that we can take without creating false hopes.
Yes. So if you're seeking to try and pin down every possibility and think of every permutation, then in a way you're a slave to your fears.
And I think that fear is a big one, is that often can create these false hopes, is because we're afraid of something, therefore we're going to be looking for a quick solution or something that seems like a really immediate, tangible now solution. And I think that in the Christian tradition, which is the basis of our Western culture, it's long been recognised that our ultimate hope comes from God, and that looking for simply materialistic solutions will not suffice. And I think that a reinvigoration of our cultural heritage will ultimately help us to not have false hopes going forward.
Thank you for joining us for this Considered Opinions podcast. We look forward to seeing you again next time, and don't forget to like, share, and subscribe.